The entire history of human civilizations, ancient to modern, imagine standing at the edge of time itself, looking back across a vast canyon of human achievement. Every city that ever rose from the dust, every empire that shook the earth, every brilliant mind that changed our destiny, they all began with a single moment. A moment when our ancestors looked up at the stars and asked, what if? What if we could control fire? What if we could grow our own food? What if we could build something that lasts forever? Today, we embark on humanity's greatest story, a journey spanning 300,000 years of triumph and tragedy, innovation and destruction, hope and despair. From the first human footprints in African soil to the digital footprints we leave across the internet, this is more than history. This is your story. The story of how a species of clever apes conquered the planet, reached for the stars, and created wonders beyond imagination. Buckle up. We're about to travel through time itself, witnessing the rise and fall of civilizations, the birth of ideas that shape our world, and the extraordinary tale of how we became. U.S. The dawn of humanity. Picture this. 300,000 years ago, somewhere in what we now call Africa, a new kind of human takes their first breath. Not quite like us, their brow ridge is more pronounced. Their brain case is slightly different but undeniably human. Homo sapiens had arrived, and the universe would never be the same. But here's what most people don't realize. We weren't alone. The world was a crowded neighborhood of human species. Neanderthals ruled Europe and Western Asia, their stocky bodies perfectly adapted to Ice Age conditions. In Asia, the mysterious Denisovans left only fragments of bones, but a lasting genetic legacy. On the Indonesian island of Flores, the tiny hobbits, Homo floresiensis, hunted miniature elephants. We were just one voice and a chorus of humanity for thousands of years. Our ancestors lived as nomadic hunter-gatherers, their lives dictated by the rhythms of nature. They moved in small bands, perhaps 25 to 50 individuals, following herds of animals and seasonal plants. But don't mistake their lifestyle for simplicity. These were the original innovators, the first scientists and artists. Around 100,000 years ago, something extraordinary happened in the human brain. We call it the cognitive revolution, though it was more like a slow-burning fuse that would eventually explode into civilization. Suddenly, humans weren't just using tools, they were creating art. In Blombos Cave in South Africa, someone carved abstract patterns into ochre 75,000 years ago. These weren't random scratches, they were symbols. Possibly the first human attempt to represent ideas outside the mind. Language evolved beyond simple communication. We began telling stories, creating myths, sharing dreams. A human could now describe not just where the deer were, but imagine where they might be tomorrow. We could warn about dangers we'd never seen, plan for futures that didn't yet exist. This was our superpower, the ability to cooperate flexibly in large numbers through shared beliefs and stories. Then came the Great Wandering. Starting around 70,000 years ago, small groups of humans began leaving Africa. This wasn't a mass exodus, but a gradual expansion, generation by generation. Following coastlines and river valleys, they crossed the gates of the Red Sea into Arabia, spread along the shores of the Indian Ocean, and reached Australia by 65,000 years ago, a journey requiring sophisticated boats and navigation. Skills we were only beginning to appreciate. As we spread, we transformed. Populations adapted to new environments with breathtaking speed. In the frozen wastes of Siberia, we developed techniques to survive temperatures that would kill within minutes. We learned to hunt mammoths, using every part of these massive beasts' meat for food, bones for tools and shelter, hide for clothing. The famous Venus figurines, carved between 25,000 and 35,000 years ago, show that even in the harsh ice age, humans found time for art, beauty, and perhaps spiritual expression. But our expansion came at a cost. Wherever Homo sapiens arrived, other human species vanished. The Neanderthals, who had survived for hundreds of thousands of years, disappeared shortly after modern humans entered Europe. Was it competition? Disease? Warfare? Or did we simply absorb them through interbreeding? Today, most non-African humans carry 1 to 4% Neanderthal DNA, ghosts in our genetic code. The end of the Ice Age, around 12,000 years ago, changed everything as glaciers retreated and the climate warmed. The world transformed. Sea levels rose, creating islands and new coastlines. Grasslands expanded, forests grew, and suddenly, the world was ripe for a revolution that would change the trajectory of our species forever. This is where our story truly begins to accelerate. For over 290,000 years, every human who ever lived was a hunter-gatherer. But in the space of just a few thousand years, scattered groups around the world would independently discover the same world-changing idea. Instead of finding food, we could grow it. The stage was set for the agricultural revolution, the first great turning point in human civilization. Little did those first farmers know that they were setting in motion a chain of events that would lead to cities, empires, and eventually, to you watching this video on a device that would seem like magic to them. The agricultural revolution. Imagine waking up one morning 12,000 years ago, in the Fertile Crescent, that arc of land stretching from modern-day Iraq through Syria and Turkey to Israel. You're part of a group called the Natafians, and something strange is happening. The wild grasses you've been gathering for generations are growing thicker near your camp. Seeds you dropped last season have sprouted. A radical thought crosses your mind. What if we could make this happen on purpose? This moment replicated independently in at least 7 different locations around the world represents one of the most profound shifts in human history. The agricultural revolution wasn't a sudden discovery, but a gradual process spanning thousands of years. And contrary to popular belief, it wasn't necessarily an improvement in human life. In fact, early farmers worked harder, ate less diverse diets, and suffered more diseases than their hunter-gatherer ancestors. So why did we do it? The answer lies in a perfect storm of circumstances. The end of the Ice Age created a warmer, more stable climate. Wild grains became more abundant. Human populations, perhaps growing due to better conditions, needed more reliable food sources. And once you start farming, there's no going back. Agricultural societies can support 10 to 100 times more people per square mile than hunter-gatherers. In the game of cultural evolution, numbers matter. The first farmers didn't plant fields as we imagined them. They practiced what we call proto-agriculture, encouraging wild plants, selecting the best seeds, gradually creating spaces where preferred plants could thrive. In the Middle East, they focused on wheat and barley. In China, it was rice along the Yangtze River and millet in the north. Mesoamericans developed an agricultural trinity: maize, beans, and squash, grown together in brilliant symbiosis. Each region's package of crops would shape its future civilization. The plants were only half the story. Animals, too, were drawn into humanity's grand experiment. Dogs came first, perhaps 15,000 years ago, or even earlier, evolved from wolves brave or desperate enough to scavenge near human camps. Then came sheep and goats in the Middle East, pigs in China, llamas and alpacas in South America. Each domestication was a multi-generational dance of mutual adaptation. We changed them, making them docile, productive, dependent, and they changed us, providing not just meat, but milk, wool, leather, and power. The consequences rippled outward like waves from a thrown stone. Permanent settlements arose because you can't move your fields. The world's first towns appeared: Jericho in the Jordan Valley, with its famous walls dating to 8000 BCE, Catalhuk in Turkey, where 8,000 people lived in honeycomb-like houses, entering through holes in their roofs. These weren't just big camps, they were something entirely new in human experience: communities of strangers living together, united not by blood, but by shared space and customs. Property, that cornerstone of civilization and conflict, was born from agriculture. Hunter-gatherers own what they can carry. Farmers own land. This shift created wealth and inequality. Some fields were better than others. Some farmers were luckier or more skilled. For the first time in human history, significant differences in material wealth appeared. Excavations show houses of vastly different sizes, graves with wildly varying amounts of goods. The egalitarianism of hunter-gatherer societies gave way to hierarchy. New technologies exploded onto the scene. Pottery, essential for storing grain and fermenting beer. Yes, beer may have been one of the driving forces behind agriculture. Appeared around 10,000 BCE. The wheel, invented around 3,500 BCE in Mesopotamia, revolutionized transport. Metalworking began with copper around 5000 BCE, then bronze and alloy of copper and tin that gave its name to an entire age. Each innovation built on the last, creating a feedback loop of technological progress. But perhaps the most profound change was invisible, the birth of new diseases. Living close to animals allowed pathogens to jump species. Crowded settlements enabled diseases to spread and persist. Smallpox, influenza, tuberculosis, humanity's deadliest killers, all emerged from this new lifestyle. These diseases would later become devastating weapons when agricultural peoples encountered isolated populations, shaping the course of conquest and colonization. Religion, too, transformed. Hunter-gatherer spirituality focused on animals and natural forces. Agricultural religions developed sky gods who controlled rain, fertility goddesses who ensured good harvests, and elaborate rituals tied to the agricultural calendar. The first temples appeared like Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, massive stone pillars carved with animals, built by hunter-gatherers on the verge of agriculture, perhaps as a last monument to a dying way of life. As populations grew and societies complexified, new forms of organization emerged. Big men and chiefs rose, individuals who could organize labor for communal projects, irrigation channels, storage facilities, defensive walls. These leaders often claimed divine sanction, beginning the long marriage between political and religious power. The groundwork was being laid for humanity's next great leap, the rise of cities and states. By 5000 BCE, agricultural societies stretched across much of the habitable world. Each had developed its own solutions to common problems, its own social structures, its own vision of how humans should live together. The stage was set for these scattered experiments to collide, compete, and combine into something unprecedented, the world's first civilizations. The rise of the first civilizations. Close your eyes and imagine standing on a hill, overlooking the Tigris River. 5,500 years ago, below you spread something the world has never seen before. Europe, the first true city, home to 50,000 souls. Its massive walls stretch for 6 miles. At its heart rises a ziggurat, a human-made mountain reaching toward the heavens. This is civilization being born, and it's louder, smellier, and more chaotic than you could possibly imagine. Mesopotamia, the land between rivers, earned its title as the cradle of civilization through geography and ingenuity. The Tigris and Euphrates rivers brought life-giving water, but also devastating floods. To survive here required cooperation on an unprecedented scale. Irrigation channels had to be dug and maintained. Floods had to be predicted and managed. Disputes over water rights had to be resolved. From these practical needs arose humanity's first complex societies. The Sumerians gave us so many firsts. It's almost embarrassing. Writing, they invented it around 3200 BCE, not for poetry or history, but for accounting. Those first clay tablets recorded beer rations and sheep counts. The wheel, the plow, the sailboat, bronze working. The concept of time divided into 60-minute hours, all Sumerian innovations. They even invented bureaucracy, creating the first professional administrators, tax collectors, and that eternal human institution, meetings. But Sumer's greatest invention might be the city-state itself. Each city, yurt, lagash, Eridu, was an independent political entity with its own patron deity, its own king, its own army. They competed fiercely, forming history's first diplomatic alliances and fighting history's first recorded wars. The Standard of a beautiful mosaic from 2600 BCE, shows both faces of civilization. One side depicts peaceful prosperity. The other shows were chariots crushing enemies. Meanwhile, 1,000 miles to the west, another great civilization was taking shape along the Nile. Ancient Egypt seems almost like civilization designed by a perfectionist. Where Mesopotamia was chaotic, Egypt was orderly. Where Sumerian city-states fought constantly, Egypt was unified under the pharaoh's divine rule. The Nile's predictable floods, so different from Mesopotamia's violent deluges, created a sense of cosmic order that permeated Egyptian culture. The pyramids, those eternal symbols of ancient achievement, represent something profound about early civilization. The Great Pyramid of Giza, built around 2560 BCE, required organizing 100,000 workers for 20 years. Every block placed was a statement. We can mobilize our entire society for a single purpose. It was civilization showing off, demonstrating that humans could now achieve the impossible through coordination. Egyptian contributions went far beyond monument building. They perfected papyrus production, creating a writing material so superior it was used for thousands of years. Their medical knowledge, recorded in texts like the Edwin Smith Papyrus, included surgical procedures and anatomical observations that wouldn't be surpassed for millennia. They created art of such beauty and spiritual power that it still takes our breath away. And they gave us the concept of the afterlife as a continuation of earthly existence, an idea that would profoundly influence human culture. Travel east to the Indus Valley, and you'll find a civilization that challenges our assumptions. Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, flourishing between 2600 and 1900 BCE, were marvels of urban planning. Streets laid out in perfect grids. Houses with private bathrooms connected to sophisticated sewage. Systems standardized weights and measures suggesting a unified economic system. Yet we find no great temples, no royal palaces, no monuments to ego. Was this a civilization without kings? A society that achieved complexity without inequality? We may never know. Their script remains undeciphered, their silence haunting. In China, civilization emerged along the Yellow River with its own distinctive character. Chinese civilization, unique among the ancient world, never truly fell. It transformed and continued, creating an unbroken cultural tradition stretching to the present. But civilization wasn't just about grand achievements. For ordinary people, life in these early civilizations was often harder than their ancestors' lives. Urban crowding, bread disease, social stratification meant most people labored to support elite minorities. Wars became deadlier with bronze weapons and organized armies. Environmental degradation, deforestation, soil salinization from irrigation, pollution from metalworking began humanity's long, troubled relationship with our planet. Yet something drove people to accept these hardships. Perhaps it was the security of walls and warriors. Perhaps it was the excitement of urban life, markets full of exotic goods, festivals honoring the gods, the simple human pleasure of gathering in crowds. Or perhaps, once the wheel of civilization began turning, it became impossible to stop. Each civilization developed its own answers to fundamental questions. How should society be organized? Mesopotamia created law codes, with Hammurabi's famous eye for an eye principle. Egypt chose divine kingship. The Indus Valley possibly experimented with more egalitarian structures. China emphasized ancestor worship and family hierarchy. How should we relate to the divine? Mesopotamians saw gods as capricious forces requiring constant appeasement. Egyptians envisioned a cosmic order maintaining universal balance. Chinese rulers claimed the mandate of heaven, legitimacy based on moral virtue. These weren't just religious ideas, they were blueprints for organizing society. By 1500 BCE, civilizations had sprouted across the globe. The Olmecs were carving colossal heads in Mesoamerica. The Minoans had created a maritime empire in the Mediterranean. The Hittites had discovered ironworking in Anatolia. Each civilization was an experiment in human organization, and their interactions through trade, war, and cultural exchange were about to create something new, a truly interconnected world. The foundation was laid: writing, cities, organized religion, social hierarchy, specialized labor, long-distance trade. All the elements that define civilization were now in place. The stage was set for the next act in humanity's drama, the age when civilizations would clash, merge, and create ideas that still guide us today. The classical age, the year is 500 BC. If you could hover above the earth like a satellite, you witness something remarkable. Across 3 continents, separated by thousands of miles, human thought is exploding in what historians call the axial age in Greece. Socrates is teaching people to question everything. In India, Buddha sits beneath a Bodhi tree, achieving enlightenment. In China, Confucius is outlining principles of social harmony. In Persia, Zoroaster preaches about the cosmic battle between good and evil. Humanity isn't just building civilizations anymore. We're asking why. This intellectual revolution didn't happen in a vacuum. By 500 BCE, civilizations had grown large and complex enough to support professional thinkers. Trade routes connected distant lands, allowing ideas to flow like water. And perhaps most importantly, the old answers weren't working anymore. Traditional religions that justified king gods and unchanging social orders were crumbling under the weight of new realities. Greece gave us a radical idea that ordinary citizens could govern themselves. Democracy, born in Athens, was messy, limited. Only free male citizens could participate, and often dysfunctional. But it represented something revolutionary: the notion that power could come from below rather than above. The Athenian experiment lasted less than 2 centuries, but its echo reverberates through history. More lasting than Greek democracy were Greek ideas. The philosophers of Athens didn't just think, they invented thinking about thinking. Socrates' method of relentless questioning, Plato's theory of ideal forms, Aristotle's systematic categorization of knowledge, these became the foundation of Western intellectual tradition. When Alexander the Great conquered much of the known world, he spread Greek culture like seeds on the wind, creating a Hellenistic civilization that stretched from Egypt to India. But if Greece was the teacher, Rome was the engineer. Where Greeks theorized about the perfect state, Romans built one that lasted 1,000 years. Roman genius lay not in innovation, but in organization. They took the best ideas from every culture they encountered and systematized them. Greek architecture became Roman engineering. Etruscan divination became Roman state religion. Celtic metalworking became Roman military equipment. The Roman Republic, and later Empire, created something unprecedented: a multi-ethnic, multi-religious state held together by law rather than ethnicity. Roman citizenship, eventually extended throughout the empire, offer protection and opportunity regardless of your origins. A Gaul could become a senator. A Spanish family could produce an emperor. This was social mobility on a scale the world had never seen. Roman infrastructure still awes us. Roads so well built we still use them. Aqueducts carrying fresh water across hundreds of miles. Concrete that's stronger than many modern varieties. But Rome's greatest engineering feat was invisible, a legal system that treated law as a science. Roman law, with its emphasis on precedent, procedure, and universal principles, became the skeleton upon which Western legal tradition would grow. Meanwhile, in China, a different experiment in universal empire was unfolding, where Rome expanded through gradual conquest. China was unified in a lightning campaign by Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor. In just 9 years, to 32 to 21 BCE, he conquered all rival states, standardized currency, writing, and measurements, and began the Great Wall. His terracotta army, discovered in 1974, reveals the scale of his ambition: 8,000 unique soldiers guarding him in death. But Chinese civilization's genius lay in creating continuity through change. The Han Dynasty, to 106 BCE to 20 CE, established a pattern that would repeat throughout Chinese history. Political unity based on cultural uniformity. The Confucian examination system, selecting government officials based on merit rather than birth. created the world's first professional civil service. Chinese innovations during this period: paper, the compass, gunpowder would later transform the world. In India, the Mauryan Empire 322 to 185 BCE showed that universal empire could be based on moral rather than military power. Emperor Ashoka, after witnessing the carnage of his own conquests, converted to Buddhism and attempted to rule through dharma righteous conduct. His edicts, carved on pillars throughout India, represent history's first attempt at public service announcements. Be kind to animals. Respect all religions. Dig wells for travelers. Though his empire didn't outlast him, his ideal of compassionate governance inspired rulers for centuries. The Gupta Empire 320 to 550 CE presided over India's golden age. Indian mathematicians invented the decimal system and the concept of zero, innovations so fundamental we can't imagine mathematics without them. Indian astronomers calculated the Earth's circumference with startling accuracy. The Kama Sutra explored human sexuality with scientific precision. Sanskrit literature reached heights of sophistication that wouldn't be matched for centuries. In the Americas, isolated from Old World developments, civilizations followed their own trajectories. The Maya, peaking between the 50 to 900 CE, created the only fully developed writing system. In the pre-Columbian Americas, their astronomical observations were so precise they predicted eclipses centuries in advance. Their mathematical system, developed independently, also included zero. Yet for all their intellectual achievements, Maya civilization remained politically fragmented, a collection of competing city-states like ancient Greece. What united all these classical civilizations was a new relationship with knowledge. Earlier civilizations have been content with how to irrigate fields, how to build walls, how to worship gods. Classical civilizations asked why. Why do objects fall? Why do societies rise and fall? Why should we be moral? This shift from practical to theoretical knowledge created philosophy, science, and systematic theology. Trade routes now connected all major civilizations. The Silk Road linked China to Rome. Monsoon winds carried merchants between India and Arabia. Ideas traveled along with goods. Buddhism spread from India to China. Greek astronomical knowledge reached India. Chinese technology moved westward. For the first time, human civilization was becoming a single, interconnected system. But success carried the seeds of destruction. Rome grew too large to govern effectively. China's unity made it vulnerable to total collapse. The Maya exhausted their environment. Nomadic peoples, long dismissed as barbarians, had been learning civilized techniques while maintaining military vigor. The stage was set for the great disruptions that would transform the classical world into something new, an age where faith would reshape civilization and where the torch of knowledge would pass to unexpected hands. The age of faith and fragmentation. The year is for 76 CE. In a ceremony remarkable mainly for its lack of ceremony, a Germanic chieftain named Odoacer deposes Romulus Augustulus, the last Roman emperor in the West. No one realizes they're witnessing the end of an era. Rome had fallen before and recovered. But this time is different. The classical world is dying, and from its ashes, something entirely new is being born. An age where faith would become the organizing principle of civilization. But Rome didn't fall in a day, it transformed over centuries. As the empire weakened, a new power had been growing within it: Christianity. What began as a small Jewish sect had conquered the conquerors, becoming Rome's official religion by 380 CE when barbarian tribes flooded across the borders. They encountered not just Roman soldiers but Roman priests, and remarkably, the barbarians converted. The Goths, Vandals, and Franks who destroyed the Western Empire would become the champions of its faith. In the East, Rome lived on as Byzantium, centered on Constantinople, the new Rome. While Western Europe fragmented into warring kingdoms, Byzantium preserved classical learning, Roman law, and Greek philosophy, all now viewed through a Christian lens. The Emperor Justinian 527 to 565 CE attempted to restore Roman glory, reconquering much of the Western Mediterranean, and codifying Roman law in the Corpus Juris Civilis, a legal foundation that still influences modern law. But Byzantium's greatest export wasn't law, it was Orthodox Christianity. Byzantine missionaries, armed with a newly created alphabet, brought literacy and faith to the Slavic peoples. Russia, Bulgaria, Serbia, entire nations would trace their cultural DNA to Byzantine influence. When Constantinople finally fell to the Ottomans in 1453, Russian rulers would claim the title of Caesar Tsar, declaring Moscow the Third Rome. While Europe struggled through what used to be called the Dark Ages, historians now prefer early Middle Ages, recognizing considerable regional variation. A new civilization was exploding across the Middle East. Islam, born in the Arabian desert around 610 CE, achieved in decades what Christianity had taken centuries to accomplish. By 750 CE, the Islamic Caliphate stretched from Spain to India, larger than Rome at its peak. Islam's rapid success wasn't just military. The new faith offered a compelling vision, radical equality before God, clear legal principles, and a mandate to seek knowledge. Seek knowledge, even unto China. The Prophet Muhammad reportedly said, Muslims took this seriously, preserving and expanding upon Greek philosophy, Indian mathematics, and Persian astronomy. While European monasteries saved what classical texts they could, Islamic scholars were writing new chapters in human knowledge. The Abbasid Caliphate, centered on Baghdad, presided over Islam's golden age. The House of Wisdom became humanity's first international research institute, where Christian, Jewish, Muslim, and Zoroastrian scholars collaborated. They didn't just translate ancient texts, they corrected, expanded, and synthesized them. Al-Khwarizmi gave us algebra. The word comes from his book title, Ibn Sina. Avicenna wrote medical texts used in Europe for 500 years. Al-Haytham essentially invented the scientific method 6 centuries before Francis Bacon. In Europe, a new synthesis was emerging. Feudalism, that complex system of mutual obligations between lords and vassals, arose from the marriage of Roman estates, Germanic war bands, and Christian ideals. It was inefficient, violent, and oppressive, but it worked. Local strongmen provided protection in exchange for service. The church provided meaning and continuity. Slowly, very slowly, Europe began to recover. Charlemagne's coronation as Roman emperor on Christmas Day, 800 CE, symbolized Europe's new direction. Here was a Germanic king, crowned by the Pope, claiming Roman authority. His Carolingian Renaissance saw a flowering of learning, art, and architecture. Though his empire fragmented after his death, the idea persisted. Europe was Christendom, a spiritual empire transcending political boundaries. The Vikings erupted from Scandinavia like a force of nature, raiding, trading, and exploring from Greenland to Constantinople. But they were more than mere raiders. Viking merchants connected Europe to Asian trade routes. Viking explorers reached America 500 years before Columbus, and when Vikings settled, they quickly adopted local customs, becoming Normans in France, Rus in Russia, and Christians everywhere. In China, the fall of the Han Dynasty in the 20 CE had led to centuries of division. But Chinese civilization demonstrated remarkable resilience. Buddhism, imported from India, was transformed into something uniquely Chinese. The Sui and Tang dynasties 581 to 907 CE reunified China and presided over perhaps the most sophisticated civilization of its time. Tang poetry remains unsurpassed. Chinese technology, printing, gunpowder. The compass continued advancing. The imperial examination system created a meritocracy more fair than anything in contemporary Europe. Japan, long in China's cultural shadow, was developing its own distinctive civilization. The indigenous Shinto faith blended with imported Buddhism to create a unique spiritual synthesis. The Heian period 794-1185 saw court ladies like Murasaki Shikibu write the world's first psychological novels. Samurai culture, with its emphasis on honor, loyalty, and martial prowess, would dominate Japan for centuries. In Africa, great civilizations flourished beyond European awareness. The kingdom of Aksum in Ethiopia had converted to Christianity in the 4th century, maintaining connections to Mediterranean civilization while developing its own traditions. In West Africa, the Ghana Empire controlled the trans-Saharan gold trade. The city of Timbuktu would soon become a center of Islamic learning rivaling Baghdad or Cordoba. The Americas witnessed their own age of faith. The classic Maya period saw the construction of massive temple complexes like Tikal and Palenque. Though Maya civilization would mysteriously collapse around 900 CE, new powers were rising. The Toltecs in central Mexico, the Mississippian culture in North America, the Wari and Tiwanaku in South America each developed complex societies, organized around religious centers. What unified the seemingly chaotic period was the triumph of universal religions. Buddhism, Christianity, and Islam offered something local gods couldn't: portable faith that transcended tribal boundaries. A Christian merchant could find co-religionists from Ireland to Ethiopia. A Muslim scholar could travel from Spain to Indonesia and find a familiar culture. These religions didn't just offer spiritual comfort, they provided international languages, legal systems, and trade networks. But this age of faith came with costs. Religious unity met religious conflict. The Crusades, beginning in 1095, brought Christians and Muslims into centuries of warfare. Pagans were converted by sword as often as by sermon. Heretics were burned, infidels expelled. Holy wars declared. The very universalism that made these religions successful also made them intolerant of alternatives. Yet for all its violence and fragmentation, this period laid foundations for the future. Universities emerged from cathedral schools. Arabic numerals revolutionized mathematics. Agricultural innovations like the heavy plow and three-field system increased food production. Banking systems developed to finance pilgrimage and trade. The pieces were falling into place for Europe's dramatic return to the world stage, and for new chapters in the human story that would challenge every assumption about progress, faith, and the nature of civilization itself. The Great Convergence. The Mongol warrior surveyed the city walls of Beijing in 1215. His breath visible in the cold morning air. Genghis Khan, born in a felt tent on the steppes, was about to conquer the most sophisticated civilization on Earth. This moment encapsulates the great paradox of the 13th century. The barbarians were creating the world's largest empire, and in doing so, they would accidentally kickstart the first true world system. The Mongols were unlikely world changers, nomadic, illiterate, numbering perhaps 1 million people. They should have been a footnote in history. Instead, under Genghis Khan and his successors, they conquered everything from Korea to Poland, creating an empire spanning 9 million square miles. Their secret wasn't just military genius though. Their composite bows, psychological warfare, and brilliant tactics certainly helped. It was their pragmatic approach to empire. Unlike previous conquerors who imposed their culture, the Mongols adopted and adapted. They used Chinese siege engineers to conquer Muslim cities, Muslim administrators to govern Russian principalities, and Russian craftsmen to build palaces in Mongolia. They were history's greatest cultural facilitators, creating a Pax Mongolica that allowed unprecedented exchange of goods, ideas, and unfortunately, diseases. The Silk Road, dormant for centuries, roared back to life under Mongol protection. A merchant could travel from Venice to Beijing under a single authority. Marco Polo wasn't the first European to reach China, but his accounts opened European eyes to Asian wealth. More importantly, technologies flowed westward: gunpowder, printing. The compass innovations that would transform Europe traveled along Mongol-protected routes. But the Mongols' greatest inadvertent gift to history was forcing different civilizations to confront each other as existence. When Mongol armies appeared at the gates of Vienna and Cairo simultaneously, when Chinese engineers served in Persian courts, when Islamic astronomers worked in Beijing, the world became undeniably interconnected. Civilizations could no longer develop in isolation. This interconnection had a dark side, the Black Death. Originating in Central Asian rodent populations, spread along trade routes in the 1340s. Within a decade, it killed between 30 to 60% of Europe's population, perhaps 25% of the Islamic world, and untold millions in Asia. The pandemic shattered the medieval world order. Labor shortages gave surviving peasants bargaining power. The church's inability to stop the plague undermined its authority. Social structures that had seemed eternal crumbled like plague victims. Yet from this catastrophe came renewal. In Europe, the Renaissance was beginning in Italian city-states. Florence, Venice, and Genoa had grown rich, facilitating trade between Europe and Asia. Now, with traditional authorities weakened, these merchant cities became laboratories for new ideas. The Medici banks in Florence pioneered international finance. Venetian merchants developed double-entry bookkeeping. Italian engineers began recovering and improving upon Roman techniques. The Renaissance wasn't just about recovering classical knowledge, it was about surpassing it. When Brunelleschi built Florence's cathedral dome, he solved engineering problems that had baffled Rome. When Leonardo da Vinci sketched his flying machines, he was imagining possibilities ancient thinkers hadn't dreamed of. Humanism, the radical idea that humans, not just God, were worthy of study, challenged medieval certainties. In the Islamic world, three great empires were emerging from the Mongol chaos. The Ottomans, starting as a small Turkish principality, would conquer Constantinople in 1453 and create an empire stretching from the Balkans to the Arabian Peninsula. The Safavids in Persia championed Shia Islam, creating a religious-political divide that persists today. The Mughals brought Islamic civilization to India, creating a brilliant synthesis of Islamic and Hindu cultures. These Islamic empires weren't medieval holdovers, they were early modern states, with professional armies, sophisticated bureaucracies, and cosmopolitan cultures. The Ottoman Devshirme system recruited Christian boys, converted them to Islam, and trained them as elite administrators and soldiers, of meritocracy more open than anything in contemporary Europe. Mughal emperors like Akbar promoted religious tolerance and cultural synthesis. Persian poets and artists created works of timeless beauty. China, having expelled the Mongols, entered its Ming dynasty 1368 to 1644 with a complex relationship to the outside world. The early Ming emperors sponsored massive naval expeditions. Between 1405 and 1433, Admiral Zheng He's treasure fleet, some containing over 300 ships, reached Southeast Asia, India, the Persian Gulf, and East Africa. These weren't voyages of conquest, but of prestige, demonstrating Chinese power and establishing trade relationships. Then, abruptly, China turned inward. The expeditions were canceled, the great ships burned, and China adopted an isolationist policy. Historians still debate why. Was it the cost? Confucian disapproval of commerce? Fear of foreign influence? Whatever the reason, China's withdrawal from maritime exploration left a vacuum that European powers would soon fill. Europe in 1400 was still a backwater compared to China, India, or the Islamic world, but it had advantages: political fragmentation that fostered competition, access to Islamic knowledge through Spain and Sicily, and Atlantic coastlines that encouraged maritime exploration. When Constantinople fell to the Ottomans in 1453, blocking traditional routes to Asian spices, European merchants were forced to find alternatives. The Portuguese led the way, creeping down the African coast decade by decade. Each voyage brought new knowledge, wind patterns, current systems, navigation techniques. By 1498, Vasco da Gama reached India by sailing around Africa. For the first time, Europeans could trade directly with Asia, bypassing Islamic middlemen. The economic implications were staggering. Meanwhile, in 1492, Christopher Columbus, seeking a western route to Asia, stumbled upon continents unknown to the Old World. The Americas weren't uninhabited wilderness, they contained sophisticated civilizations. The Aztec Empire ruled central Mexico from the magnificent city of Tenochtitlan. larger than any European city. The Inca Empire stretched along the Andes, connected by roads rivaling Rome's. Countless smaller societies had developed their own complex cultures. The meeting of old and new worlds was apocalyptic for Native Americans. Diseases to which they had no immunity, smallpox, measles, influenza, killed 90% of the indigenous population within a century. Entire civilizations vanished almost overnight. Spanish conquistadors, exploiting political divisions and disease-weakened populations, toppled empires with tiny forces. The human cost was incalculable. But the Columbian Exchange transformed both worlds. New World crops, potatoes, maize, tomatoes revolutionized Old World agriculture. Potatoes alone allowed European populations to boom. American silver flooded global markets, financing trade from Europe to China. Old World animals, horses, cattle, pigs transformed American landscapes, for better and worse. The world's ecosystems were now connected. By 1500, all the pieces were in place for the modern world system. Ocean-going ships connected all continents. Gunpowder weapons were revolutionizing warfare. The printing press was democratizing knowledge. Banking systems could finance global ventures. Scientific methods were challenging ancient authorities. The stage was set for European expansion, scientific revolution, and the birth of the modern world, developments that would utterly transform human civilization and create the globalized, interconnected, brilliant, and troubled world we inhabit today. The age of revolution and reason. Picture yourself in a coffee house in London, 1687. The air is thick with tobacco smoke and animated conversation. At one table, merchants debate sugar prices from Jamaica. At another, natural philosophers discuss a radical new book by someone named Newton, claiming invisible forces govern the universe. A pamphleteer scribbles attacks on the king's policies. This scene, commerce, science, and political discourse mixing freely, captures the essence of a world in transformation. The scientific revolution didn't begin with a bang, but with careful observations. Copernicus, a Polish canon, quietly proposed in 1543 that Earth orbited the sun. It seemed absurd. Everyone could see the sun moving across the sky, but mathematics supported this heliocentric model. Galileo's telescope revealed moons orbiting Jupiter, proving not everything revolved around Earth. The universe suddenly became vast, mechanical, and explicable through natural laws rather than divine whim. Newton's Principia Mathematica in 1687 was the revolution's culmination. Here was a system explaining everything from falling apples to planetary orbits with mathematical precision. The same laws govern heaven and earth. God might have created the universe, but he apparently let it run like clockwork. This mechanical worldview would reshape not just science but philosophy, politics, and economics. Meanwhile, Europe was tearing itself apart over religion. The Protestant Reformation, initiated by Martin Luther in 1517, shattered Western Christianity's unity. Wars of religion devastated Central Europe. The 30 Years' War killed perhaps 8 million people, proportionally more deadly than World War I. From this carnage emerged an unexpected principle. Quis regio? Ius religio, whose realm? His religion. Religious tolerance born not from enlightenment, but exhaustion. The real winner was the state. To wage these wars, monarchs needed professional armies, regular taxation, and efficient bureaucracies. The modern state system emerged, with sovereignty replacing feudal obligations. Louis XIV of France epitomized absolute monarchy. L'état, c'est moi, he supposedly declared. Versailles, his magnificent palace, demonstrated royal power while bankrupting France. Little did anyone know these displays of absolute power were sowing seeds of revolution. Across the Atlantic, European colonies were developing their own dynamics. Spanish America had become a complex caste society, mixing European, indigenous, and African peoples in combinations that defied simple categorization. Brazil's sugar plantations and Caribbean islands created wealth beyond imagination and human misery beyond description. The Atlantic slave trade, history's largest forced migration, brought 12 million Africans to the Americas. The profits funded European development. The human cost remains incalculable. North American colonies developed differently. Without gold or large indigenous populations to exploit, colonists created settler societies. New England Puritans sought religious freedom for themselves, not others. Virginia planters established tobacco plantations worked by enslaved Africans. Pennsylvania Quakers experimented with religious tolerance. Each colony was a social experiment, accidentally creating traditions of self-governance that would have revolutionary consequences. The Enlightenment emerged from coffee houses, salons, and scientific societies. If natural laws governed physics, why not society? John Locke argued governments derive legitimacy from consent of the governed. Voltaire skewered religious intolerance with satirical wit. Adam Smith described economics as governed by an invisible hand of market forces. These weren't just abstract ideas, they were intellectual dynamite. The American Revolution 1775 to 1783 turned Enlightenment theory into practice. Colonial rebels justified independence through natural rights and social contracts. The Declaration of Independence as assertion that all men are created equal was revolutionary even if its authors didn't fully grasp the implications. Here was a republic founded on ideas rather than tradition, citizenship rather than subjects, written constitution rather than ancient customs. France watched American success with interest and bankruptcy. Financing American independence broke the royal treasury. When Louis XVI called the Estates General in 1789 the first time, in 175 years he opened floodgates. He can close. The French Revolution began with noble ideals, liberty, equality, fraternity. It descended into terror, with the guillotine claiming thousands, including the king and queen. Yet its impact was profound. Feudalism was abolished. Church lands were nationalized. The metric system rationalized measurement. Most importantly, the idea spread that ordinary people could overthrow governments. Napoleon Bonaparte emerged from revolutionary chaos, crowning himself emperor in 1804. His Grande Army carried revolutionary ideals and French domination across Europe. Everywhere Napoleon's armies marched, old structures crumbled. The Holy Roman Empire, existing since Charlemagne, was dissolved. Legal codes were modernized. Nationalism awakened as peoples united against French occupation. Even Napoleon's defeat couldn't restore the old order. But Europe wasn't the only site of revolution. In Haiti, enslaved Africans led by Toussaint Louverture overthrew French rule, creating the world's first black republic in 1804. The unthinkable had happened. Slaves had defeated European powers. Panic spread through plantation societies. If it could happen in Haiti, why not Virginia or Brazil or Cuba? Latin American independence movements followed, led by Creole elites like Simon Bolivar and José de San Martin. By 1825, most of Spanish America had gained independence. Brazil separated from Portugal peacefully. But independence didn't bring equality. New nations remained dominated by European-descended elites, with indigenous peoples and those of African descent marginalized. In Asia, established empires viewed European expansion with varying strategies. The Qing dynasty in China, at its height under the Qianlong Emperor, restricted European trade to Canton and demanded silver payment. The Mughal Empire in India was fracturing, allowing the British East India Company to play princely states against each other. Japan's Tokugawa shogunate chose isolation, permitting only limited Dutch trade. These strategies would have different outcomes, shaping Asian encounters with modernity. The Ottoman Empire, once Europe's terror, was now the sick man of Europe. Military defeats revealed technological gaps. Reform attempts like the Tanzimat tried to modernize while preserving Islamic character. Similar challenges faced Persia, Morocco, and other Islamic states. How could they adopt Western technology without Western values? This question would dominate Islamic thought for centuries. Africa remained largely independent, protected by disease barriers and strong kingdoms. The Asani Empire controlled gold trade. The Zulu kingdom was perfecting military innovations. Ethiopia maintained ancient Christian traditions. But the slave trade's demographic catastrophe weakened African societies. European explorers were beginning to penetrate the interior, mapping resources for future exploitation. By 1800, the world had fundamentally changed. Divine right monarchy was questioned everywhere. Scientific method challenged religious authority. Global trade connected all continents. Revolutionary ideals, liberty, equality, popular sovereignty spread like viruses. The stage was set for the next transformation, the Industrial Revolution, which would compress centuries of change into decades and create the modern world's framework. Traditional societies worldwide would face a stark choice: adapt or perish. Many would attempt both simultaneously, with consequences still unfolding today. The Industrial Transformation, the year is 1825. In northern England, a crowd gathers to witness something unprecedented. George Stephenson's locomotion No. 1 pulling the world's first passenger train. As the engine belches smoke and steam, reaching the terrifying speed of 15 miles per hour, some spectators faint, convinced such velocity will suffocate passengers. They're witnessing more than a new machine, they're seeing the future arriving at unprecedented speed. The Industrial Revolution began quietly in 18th century Britain with a simple question: how can we make more thread? The spinning jenny, water frame, and spinning mule mechanized textile production. What once took a skilled spinner days now took machines hours. Cotton from American plantations, worked by enslaved Africans, fed British mills operated by wage laborers, creating textiles sold globally. The world economy was being rewoven like cloth itself. But why Britain? The island nation had unique advantages: coal deposits, colonial markets, accumulated capital from trade, and crucially, a political system protecting property rights. The enclosure movement had driven peasants from common lands, creating a workforce with nothing to sell but labor. Scientific culture encouraged tinkering. Patent laws rewarded innovation. Geography helped. No point in Britain was far from navigable water, easing transport. Steam power was the revolution's beating heart. James Watt's improved steam engine 1769 could power anything: mills, mines, ships, eventually locomotives. Coal, previously just heating fuel, became civilization's lifeblood. The more coal you burn, the more machines you could power, the more coal you could mine. This feedback loop drove exponential growth. Britain's coal consumption increased 800% during the 19th century. The human impact was jarring. Manchester, a market town of 25,000 in 1770, exploded to 300,000 by 1850. Friedrich Engels described workers living in cellars where a human being could hardly live. Factory discipline replaced agricultural rhythms. Workers punched clocks, performed repetitive tasks, lived by artificial light. Children as young as 6 worked 14-hour days in textile mills. The Luddites, skilled weavers who smashed machines threatening their livelihoods, were crushed by government forces. Yet industrialization created unprecedented wealth. British per capita income doubled between 1780 and 1860. New middle classes emerged: factory owners, engineers, clerks. They demanded political representation, achieving it through the Reform Act of 1832. Consumer goods once reserved for aristocrats gotten. Clothes, tea, sugar became affordable for ordinary people. The workshop of the world was transforming lives. Material conditions. Railways revolutionized more than transport. They required massive capital mobilization, creating modern stock markets. They needed precise scheduling, standardizing time itself. They shrank distance. Journeys taking days now took hours. Information traveled at train speed. Markets integrated. Provincial isolation ended. The railway was industrialization's perfect symbol: powerful, precise, unstoppable, occasionally deadly. Other nations scrambled to industrialize. Belgium, with coal and strategic location, industrialized first. France developed more gradually, balancing industry with agriculture. German states, initially fragmented, used railways to unite economically before political unification in 1871. The United States, with vast resources and immigrant labor, industrialized rapidly after the Civil War. By 1900, America had surpassed Britain in industrial output. Each nation's path reflected its character. American industrialization was brash, wasteful, innovative. Railroads spanned a continent. Cities like Chicago grew from nothing to metropolises in decades. Robber barons like Rockefeller and Carnegie created industrial empires. German industrialization was systematic, scientific, dominated by cartels and technical education. Japanese industrialization after 1868 was state-directed, selective, preserving cultural identity while adopting Western technology. Industrialization transformed warfare. The American Civil War 1861 to 1865 previewed industrial conflict, railways moving armies, telegraphs coordinating strategy, mass-produced rifles creating unprecedented casualties. The Union's industrial superiority crushed. The Agrarian Confederacy. European observers should have noted the warning. Instead, they believed wars would be swift, decisive. This illusion would die in World War I's trenches. Science and industry cross-fertilized. Chemistry created synthetic dyes, explosives, fertilizers. Electricity, understood theoretically by Faraday, powered Edison's light bulbs and Tesla's motors. The internal combustion engine would soon challenge steam power. Each innovation spawned others. The pace of change, gradual for millennia, became torrential. Social consequences were profound. Karl Marx, observing British factories, predicted capitalism's contradictions would create revolution. Workers would unite, overthrow bourgeois oppression, create classless society. His Communist Manifesto 1848 provided industrial capitalism's most influential critique. Whether accepting or rejecting Marx's solutions, few denied his diagnosis of alienation and exploitation. Others sought reform, not revolution. Trade unions fought for better wages and conditions. Social reformers like Robert Owen experimented with model communities. Governments slowly enacted regulations, limiting child labor, mandating safety measures, providing elementary education. The welfare state's seeds were planted in industrialization's harsh soil. Industrialization's global impact was immediate. British textiles destroyed Indian handloom. Weaving, cheap manufactured goods undermined traditional crafts worldwide. Colonial powers forced open markets. The Opium Wars 1839 to 1842, 1856 to 1860 compelled China to accept British trade, including narcotics. Japan, observing China's humiliation, chose radical modernization during the Meiji Restoration, transforming from feudal society to industrial power in decades. The great divergence between Europe and the rest accelerated. In 1800, average incomes in Europe and Asia were comparable. By 1900, Europeans were multiple times wealthier. This wasn't just economic, it was psychological. Europeans convinced themselves their dominance reflected racial superiority rather than historical contingency. Social Darwinism justified imperialism as natural selection. The white man's burden rationalized exploitation as civilizing mission. Environmental consequences accumulated slowly, then suddenly. Coal smoke darkened skies. London's pea soup fogs killed thousands. Rivers became sewers. Forests vanished into furnaces. Few worried about long-term impacts. Nature seemed infinite. Technology omnipotent. Only later would humanity realize industrialization's true costs. By 1850, the world was irrevocably transformed. Agricultural societies persisting for millennia were being swept away. Time itself accelerated more change in decades than previous centuries. Distance collapsed. Information exploded. Cities mushroomed. Traditional authorities landed. Aristocracy, established churches lost ground to new powers. Industrialists, scientists, engineers. Yet this was only the beginning. The second industrial revolution, steel, electricity, chemicals, oil would dwarf the first. Assembly lines would make mass production routine. Corporations would span continents. Wars would become global catastrophes. Technologies would emerge threatening humanity's survival. The industrial transformation unleashed forces still shaping our world for better and worse. The genie was out of the bottle, and no one knew how to control its power. The height of Empire Berlin, November 15, 1884. In Bismarck's chancellery, European diplomats huddle over a map of Africa, drawing lines across a continent most have never visited. No Africans are present as their homeland is carved up like a cake. The Congo goes to Belgium's King Leopold as personal property. France takes vast swaths of West Africa. Britain claims a strip from Cairo to Cape Town. Within 30 years, 90% of Africa will be under European control. This is imperialism at its most brazen, and the world will never recover from its consequences. The late 19th century witnessed imperialism on a scale that dwarfed all previous empires. This new imperialism wasn't just about trading posts or coastal enclaves, it was about total domination. Industrial powers needed raw materials, rubber for tires, oil for engines, copper for electrical wires. They needed markets for manufactured goods. Most of all, they needed to prove their superiority in a vicious competition where prestige was measured in square miles of territory. Technology made this possible. The Maxim gun, invented in 1884, gave Europeans devastating firepower. As Hilaire Belloc wrote with chilling honesty, "Whatever happens, we have got / the Maxim gun, and they have not." Quinine prevented malaria, opening tropical interiors. Steamships and railways penetrated continents. Telegraphs enabled London to govern India, Paris to control Indochina, Washington to rule the Philippines. The scramble for Africa was imperialism's most dramatic expression. In 1870, Europeans controlled 10% of Africa. By 1914, only Ethiopia and Liberia remained independent. The human cost was staggering. King Leopold's Congo Free State became a vast forced labor camp, where millions died harvesting rubber. German forces committed genocide against the Herero and Namaka peoples in southwest Africa. British concentration camps during the Boer War killed thousands of civilians. But Africans didn't submit passively. The Zulu kingdom fought brilliantly before falling to British firepower. Ethiopia's Emperor Menelik II defeated Italy at Adwa in 1896, preserving independence and shattering myths of European invincibility. The Mahdi drove Britain from Sudan for 13 years. Across the continent, resistance movements, some military, some religious, some cultural, challenged colonial rule. In Asia, ancient empires crumbled under Western pressure. The British Raj formalized control over India after the 1857 rebellion. The British claimed they were bringing civilization, building railways, establishing law and order. What they actually brought was economic exploitation. India's share of world GDP fell from 23% to 3% under British rule. Famines killed millions while grain was exported. Traditional industries were destroyed to create markets for British goods. China's humiliation deepened. The Taiping Rebellion 1850 to 1864, partly inspired by Christianity, killed perhaps 20 million people. History's deadliest civil war. Foreign powers exploited the chaos, carving out spheres of influence. The Boxer Rebellion of 1900, targeting foreigners and Chinese Christians, was crushed by an 8-nation alliance. China's last imperial dynasty tottered toward collapse. Japan chose a radically different path. After Commodore Perry's black ships forced Japan open in 1854, Japanese leaders decided to master Western technology while preserving Japanese spirit. The Meiji Restoration transformed a feudal society into an industrial power with stunning speed. By 1905, Japan shocked the world by defeating Russia the first time an Asian power had beaten a European empire in modern times. The United States joined the imperial game after conquering its own continent. Native American peoples were crushed, their land stolen, their children forced into schools designed to kill the Indian, save the man. The Spanish-American War of 1898 gave America overseas colonies, Philippines, Puerto Rico, Guam, Filipinos who expected Independence instead faced brutal suppression. America claimed to be different from European empires while behaving remarkably similarly. This was also the age of massive migrations. Between 1850 and 1930, 60 million Europeans emigrated, seeking opportunities in Americas, Australia, and Africa. Millions of Indians and Chinese became indentured laborers in plantations worldwide. Jews fled pogroms in Russia. These movements created today's ethnic patterns: Chinese communities in Southeast Asia, Indian populations in Africa and the Caribbean, European settlers across the globe. Cities exploded into metropolises. London reached 6.5 million people by 1900. New York's skyline sprouted skyscrapers. Paris was rebuilt with grand boulevards. These cities showcased imperial wealth, museums filled with looted treasures, zoos displaying exotic peoples alongside animals, department stores selling goods from every corner of empire. Electric lights turned night into day. Subway systems moved millions. The future seemed to belong to the West. But beneath the glittering surface, tensions simmered. Workers organized increasingly radical unions. Socialists won elections. Women demanded suffrage and sometimes bombed and burned to get it. Anarchists assassinated leaders. The Belle Epoc's beautiful facade concealed deep anxieties about modernity, democracy, and social change. Science continued its triumphant march. Darwin's evolution theory revolutionized biology and was twisted into scientific racism justifying imperialism. Pasteur and Koch identified disease-causing bacteria, enabling public health revolutions. Marie Curie discovered radioactivity. Einstein's 1905 papers shattered Newtonian certainties. Freud explored the unconscious mind. Each discovery revealed nature's complexity while undermining traditional certainties. Culture reflected imperial anxieties. Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness exposed colonialism's horror. Picasso's Les Demoiselles de Vignon shattered artistic conventions with African-inspired forms. Stravinsky's Rite of Spring caused riots with its primitive rhythms. High culture was fracturing, incorporating primitive influences while questioning civilized superiority. Meanwhile, global integration accelerated. The gold standard linked world currencies. International telegraph. Cables created instant communication. Steamship lines ran on precise schedules. The first modern Olympics 1896 and World's Fairs celebrated international cooperation. Nobel Prizes recognized global achievement. Some believed economic interdependence made major war impossible. They were catastrophically wrong. Imperial competition created a powder keg. Germany, unified in 1871, demanded its place in the sun. Alliance systems meant local conflicts could trigger general war. Arms races accelerated dreadnought battleships, massive armies. Detailed mobilization plans. Nationalism reached fever pitch. Social Darwinism suggested war was natural selection between races. By 1914, European empires controlled 84% of the world's land surface. White supremacy seemed permanently established. Industrial civilization appeared triumphant. Progress seemed inevitable. Liberal democracy was spreading. Science was conquering nature. Humanity had never been more powerful, prosperous, or confident. Within months, this entire worldview would lie shattered in the mud of Flanders. The Great War would destroy not just millions of lives, but the very idea of Western civilization as superiority. Empires that seemed eternal would crumble. Colonized peoples would demand freedom. The 20th century's 30-year crisis was about to begin, teaching humanity terrible lessons about the price of hubris and the fragility of civilization. The age of empire was ending in apocalypse. The crucible century, the young British soldier scribbled in his diary on July 1st, 1916. Going over the top in 10 minutes. Machine guns rattling already. He wouldn't survive the day. By sunset, 20,000 British soldiers lay dead on the Somme first day, the bloodiest in British military history. More would die for a few miles of mud than in entire previous wars. This wasn't warfare as humanity knew it. This was industrialized slaughter, and it would reshape everything. World War I began almost casually. An Austrian archduke was assassinated in Sarajevo. Alliance systems activated like falling dominoes. Within weeks, millions were mobilizing. Leaders promised quick victory, home by Christmas. Instead, the Western Front froze into trenches stretching from Switzerland to the sea. Men lived like rats in muddy holes, periodically ordered to charge into machine gun fire. New horrors appeared: poison gas, flamethrowers, aerial bombing. The war's scale defied comprehension. 10 million soldiers died. 20 million were wounded. The Ottoman Empire's Armenian genocide killed over 1 million civilians. Russia lost more people than any other nation, setting the stage for revolution. An entire generation of European men was decimated. Villages lost every young man. Aristocratic officer classes were virtually exterminated, taking old Europe's social order with them. But the war's impact went beyond casualties. Women entered factories, proving they could do men's work. Colonial subjects who fought for their empires returned home questioning why they shouldn't govern themselves. The Russian Empire collapsed first, replaced by Lenin's Bolsheviks promising peace, land, bread, and world revolution. By war's end, the German, Austrian, and Ottoman empires had also vanished. The 1919 Paris Peace Conference tried to remake the world. Woodrow Wilson's 14 points promised self-determination, but only for Europeans. The Middle East's borders were drawn by British and French diplomats, creating nations that combined hostile groups. Germany was humiliated and impoverished by the Versailles Treaty. John Maynard Keynes warned the economic consequences would be catastrophic. He was right. The 1920s roared with desperate energy. Jazz music, born from African-American experience, conquered the world. Women bobbed their hair, raised their hemlines, and claimed new freedoms. Automobiles transformed landscapes. Radio created mass culture. Cinema became the universal art form. In Germany's Weimar Republic, cultural experimentation reached fever-pitch. Bauhaus architecture, expressionist film, cabaret decadence. It felt like civilization was either being reborn or dying. Then came 1929's Wall Street crash. The global economy, already fragile, shattered completely. By 1932, world trade had fallen 65%. Unemployment reached 25% in America, higher elsewhere. Germany had 6 million unemployed. Desperate people turned to extreme solutions. In the Soviet Union, Stalin's collectivization killed millions of peasants. The Nazis didn't hide their intentions. Mein Kampf outlined plans for conquest and genocide. Yet democratic powers, traumatized by WWI, chose appeasement. Each concession Rhineland, Austria, Czechoslovakia emboldened Hitler. Stalin, after failing to secure Western alliance, signed a non-aggression pact with Hitler. When Germany invaded Poland on September 1, 1939, the world descended into an even more terrible war. World War II was truly global. Battles raged from Arctic convoys to Pacific atolls, from Saharan deserts to Asian jungles. Technology reached new destructive heights: radar, jet engines, rockets, computers. But this war's distinctive horror was genocide. The Holocaust systematically murdered 6 million Jews, along with Roma, disabled people, homosexuals, political dissidents. Japan's armies committed massive atrocities in China. War's boundary between soldiers and civilians dissolved. The war's turning points came through industrial might. Britain survived the Blitz through radar and determination. The Soviet Union, despite losing 27 million people, outproduced and outfought Germany. America became the arsenal of democracy, its factories producing Liberty ships, B-29 bombers, and atomic bombs. When the mushroom clouds rose over Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945, humanity entered a new era, one where we could destroy ourselves completely. From war's ashes emerged a transformed world. Europe lay in ruins, its empires dying. Its claim to lead civilization shattered. Two superpowers dominated: America and the Soviet Union, each claiming history's final ideology, the United Nations. learning from the League of Nations failures, tried to prevent future wars. The Nuremberg trials established that following orders was no defense for crimes against humanity. Decolonization accelerated with stunning speed. India gained independence in 1947, though partition created Pakistan amid horrific communal violence. Indonesia threw off Dutch rule. African nations achieved independence throughout the 1950s and 60s. Some transitions were peaceful, others, like Algeria and Vietnam, required brutal wars. By 1970, European empires had largely vanished, replaced by dozens of new nations. The Cold War froze this new world into rigid blocks. The Iron Curtain divided Europe. Nuclear weapons made direct superpower conflict suicidal, so proxy wars raged in Korea, Vietnam, Afghanistan. The Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962 brought humanity within hours of nuclear war. Yet this terror created strange stability, the balance of terror that prevented World War III. Technology advanced at dizzying speed. Television transformed culture. Jet travel shrank the world. Computers evolved from room-sized calculators to personal devices. In 1969, humans walked on the moon, the same species that had invented powered flight just 66 years earlier. Medical advances, antibiotics, vaccines, transplants doubled life expectancy. The Green Revolution fed billions. Birth control pills revolutionized gender relations. Cultural revolutions accompanied technological ones. The 1960s saw youth worldwide reject their parents' values. Civil rights movements challenged racial hierarchies. Feminism questioned gender roles. Environmental movements warned about pollution and limits to growth. Rock music became rebellion's soundtrack. For a moment, it seemed everything might change. But the old order proved resilient. The Soviet system, despite early achievements, stagnated under bureaucratic oppression. China's Cultural Revolution showed communism could be as murderous as fascism. Capitalism adapted, absorbing countercultural style while maintaining economic structures. By the 1980s, conservatives like Reagan and Thatcher were proclaiming there was no alternative to market economics. The crucible century had transformed humanity. In 1900, most people lived as their ancestors had for centuries in agricultural villages, governed by traditional hierarchies, limited to muscle power. By 2000, humanity was urban, educated, connected, and capable of both creating and destroying on a planetary scale. The century's lessons were contradictory. Human progress was possible, but not inevitable. Technology could liberate or enslave. Ordinary people could resist evil or enable it. To numbers captured the paradox. In 1900, there were 1.6 billion humans. By 2000, there were 6 billion, an unprecedented population explosion made possible by modern medicine and agriculture. Yet the century also saw humanity kill over 100 million of its own kind through war, genocide, and political murder. We had become gods with the power to create and destroy life on a massive scale. Whether we had gained the wisdom to use this power remained history's great unanswered question. The Digital Revolution, November 9, 1989. A young East German border guard stands confused as thousands surge toward the Berlin Wall. No one gave clear orders. Should he shoot? Instead, he opens the gate. Within hours, people are dancing on the wall, taking sledgehammers to the concrete that divided families for 28 years. Television broadcasts the images globally, in real time. The Cold War is ending not with nuclear annihilation, but with a party. And everyone with a TV is watching history happen live. The wall's fall symbolized more than communism's collapse. It marked a new era, where information could no longer be contained. The digital revolution, quietly building since the 1970s, was about to transform human civilization more profoundly than the Industrial Revolution. But unlike steam engines, visible and tangible, this revolution's machinery was invisible: silicon chips, software code, electromagnetic waves carrying data at light speed. It began with the microprocessor. Intel's 4000 for chip in 1971 put a computer's power on a fingernail-sized silicon wafer. Moore's law, the observation that computing power doubles every 2 years, became the digital age's drumbeat. What filled rooms in 1950 fit on desktops by 1980. By 1990, it fit in your palm. Each iteration wasn't just smaller, but exponentially more powerful, enabling previously unimaginable applications. Personal computers democratized information processing. The Apple II, introduced in 1977, brought computing to homes and schools. IBM's PC, launched in 1981, conquered offices. Microsoft's DOS, then Windows, created common platforms. Suddenly, a tool once reserved for governments and corporations was available to individuals. Kids learned programming. Small businesses managed inventory. Writers abandoned typewriters. The knowledge economy was born. But computers alone weren't revolutionary. Connection was. The Internet, developed from 1960s military research, exploded into public consciousness in the 1990s. Tim Berners-Lee's World Wide Web, launched in 1991, made the Internet navigable by normal humans. Mosaic, the first popular web browser, appeared in 1993. By 1995, Amazon was selling books online. By 2000, the dot-com boom had created and destroyed $1 trillion in paper wealth. Globalization accelerated to warp speed. Manufacturing scattered across the planet seeking cheapest labor. A shirt might be designed in Italy, woven from Indian cotton in Bangladesh, sewn in Vietnam, and sold in New York. Financial markets integrated so completely that a crisis in Thailand could crash economies in Brazil. Culture globalized to American movies, Japanese anime. Korean pop music found worldwide audiences. English became the de facto global language. China's transformation epitomized globalization's power. After Mao's death in 1976, Deng Xiaoping launched economic reforms. To get rich is glorious, he declared, reversing decades of communist orthodoxy. Special economic zones attracted foreign investment. Hundreds of millions of peasants became factory workers. By 2010, China was the world's second largest economy. The Middle Kingdom had returned to global prominence through capitalism with Chinese characteristics. The Soviet Union couldn't adapt. Gorbachev's reforms, glasnost openness, and perestroika restructuring unleashed forces beyond control. Information flow revealed the system's failures. Nationalist movements erupted in republics. The August 1991 coup attempt collapsed when citizens, coordinating through fax machines and photocopiers, resisted. By December, the USSR ceased to exist. The 20th century's great ideological experiment ended not with bang but whimper. America stood alone as sole superpower, proclaiming history's end and liberal democracy's final triumph. The 1990s seemed to validate this optimism. Democracy spread, economies grew. The Internet promised unlimited information access. Human genome mapping suggested diseases conquest. Even ancient enemies made peace. South Africa ended apartheid. Northern Ireland achieved ceasefire. Israel and Palestinians negotiated. Then came September 11, 2001, 19 men with box cutters, coordinating through email and flight schools, killed 3,000 people and shattered American invulnerability. The attacks, broadcast live globally, demonstrated that asymmetric warfare could humble superpowers. America's response wars in Afghanistan and Iraq proved military might couldn't defeat ideological extremism. The unipolar moment was already ending. Meanwhile, the digital revolution accelerated. Google, founded in 1998, organized world information. Social media, Friendster, MySpace. Then Facebook connected billions. Wikipedia democratized knowledge creation. YouTube made everyone a potential broadcaster. Twitter reduced communication to 140 characters. Smartphones, launched with Apple's iPhone in 2007, put computers in pockets. By 2010, more people had mobile phones than toilets. These tools transform society in ways their creators never intended. The Arab Spring of 2011 saw protesters coordinate through Facebook and Twitter, toppling dictators who had ruled for decades. But the same tools spread misinformation, enabled surveillance, and polarized societies. ISIS recruited through social media. Russia manipulated elections through Facebook ads. The promise of bringing humanity together seemed to be dividing us into hostile tribes. Economic transformation accompanied digital change. Amazon destroyed retail stores. Uber disrupted taxis without owning cars. Airbnb challenged hotels without owning buildings. The gig economy replaced stable employment with precarious freelancing. Wealth concentrated dramatically by 2020. 26 individuals owned as much as the poorest half of humanity. The middle class, industrialization's great creation, hollowed out in developed nations. Artificial intelligence emerged from science fiction into reality. Deep Blue beat chess champion Garry Kasparov in 1997. Watson won Jeopardy! In 2011. AlphaGo defeated the world's best Go player in 2016. Machine learning algorithms begin driving cars, diagnosing diseases, and making decisions affecting millions. Each breakthrough raised profound questions. If machines could think, what made humans special? Climate change, long dismissed, became undeniable. Extreme weather events multiplied. Arctic ice melted, sea levels rose. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change warned of catastrophic consequences without immediate action, yet international cooperation proved elusive. The Kyoto Protocol failed. Copenhagen disappointed, even as renewable energy became cheaper than fossil fuels. Political will lag behind physical necessity. Biology joined the digital revolution. CRISPR gene editing, developed in 2012, made DNA manipulation precise and affordable. Synthetic biology promised designer organisms. Brain-computer interfaces moved from laboratories to early adopters. The boundary between human and machine, natural and artificial, began dissolving. Humanity was gaining godlike powers over life itself. By 2020, 8 billion humans inhabited Earth, more than lived in all previous history combined. Most lived in cities, carried supercomputers in their pockets, and had access to humanity's accumulated knowledge. Yet inequality widened. Democracy retreated. Truth itself became contested as alternative facts and deep fakes made reality negotiable. The digital revolution had given humanity unprecedented tools, but wisdom to use them wisely remained elusive. The COVID-19 pandemic of 2020 accelerated digital transformation overnight. Work, education, and social life moved online. Digital contact tracing fought disease spread. mRNA vaccines, developed at unprecedented speed using computational biology, saved millions. The pandemic proved both our technological capability and our social fragility. We could create vaccines in months but couldn't agree to distribute them fairly. Standing at digital revolution's midpoint, humanity faced existential questions. Could democracy survive when algorithms shape beliefs? Could capitalism function when automation eliminated jobs? Could the planet support digital civilization's energy demands? The tools we'd created were reshaping us in turn. Whether Homo sapiens would become Homo digitalis or extinct remained an open question. Humanity at the crossroads. Look at Earth from space today, and you see a transformed planet. City lights outline continents. Satellites swarm in orbit. The Great Wall of China is invisible, but the glow of humanity's presence is unmistakable. We've become a geological force, altering atmosphere, oceans, and climate. Scientists call this the Anthropocene, the age of humans. But as we stand in 2025, the question isn't whether we've changed the world, but whether we can survive what we've created. The climate crisis accelerates with each passing year. 2023 was the hottest year in recorded history until 2024 broke the record. Wildfires rage from Australia to California to the Amazon. Hurricanes intensify. Floods devastate, droughts expand. The Greenland ice sheet loses to 180 billion tons annually. Pacific islands disappear beneath waves. 1 billion people face displacement by 2050. We know what's happening, why it's happening, and how to stop it. Yet collective action remains paralyzed by politics, economics, and human psychology. Technology races ahead at breakneck speed. Artificial intelligence, once struggling with simple tasks, now writes poetry, creates art, and codes software. GPT models engage in conversations indistinguishable from humans. Self-driving cars navigate complex cities. Robots perform surgery. Quantum computers crack problems classical computers couldn't solve in a million years. Each breakthrough brings us closer to artificial general intelligence machines that match or exceed human cognition across all domains. This technological explosion creates unprecedented opportunities and existential risks. Gene therapy cures previously incurable diseases. Lab-grown meat could end animal agriculture. Fusion power promises clean, unlimited energy. Brain implants restore sight to the blind and movement to the paralyzed. We stand on the brink of defeating aging itself. Yet the same technologies enable mass surveillance, autonomous weapons, and engineered pandemics. We're giving ourselves the power of gods without God's wisdom. Global power shifts reshape the world order. China challenges American hegemony economically, technologically, and militarily. India's population surpasses China's. Its economy booms. Its influence grows. Africa, home to the world's youngest population, begins asserting its voice. The unipolar moment definitively ends as multiple centers of power emerge. Whether this multipolar world will be more stable or more chaotic remains uncertain. Democracy retreats globally. Authoritarian leaders master social media manipulation. Surveillance technology enables unprecedented control. Even established democracies see polarization deepen, institutions weaken. Truth become negotiable. The promise that economic development would bring political freedom proves false, as China demonstrates that authoritarianism and prosperity can coexist. The 21st century's great ideological battle isn't between capitalism and communism, but between democracy and digital authoritarianism. Inequality reaches levels not seen since the Gilded Age. Billionaires plan Mars colonies while billions lack clean water. The pandemic widened every gap. Rich nations hoarded vaccines while poor nations waited. Remote work privileged knowledge workers while essential workers risked their lives. Children with computers continued education while those without fell behind. Technology that promised to democratize opportunity instead concentrates advantage among those already advantaged. Yet hope persists in unexpected places. Generation Z, raised on climate warnings and school shooting drills, refuses to accept previous generations' failures. They organize globally, demand action, create change. Renewable energy, once dismissed as impractical, becomes cheaper than fossil fuels. Electric vehicles go mainstream. Lab-grown meat enters restaurants. Carbon capture technology scales up. The tools to solve our crises exist, we need the will to use them. Space, humanity's final frontier, opens for business. Private companies launch rockets cheaper than governments. Starlink satellites bring internet to remote villages. Asteroid mining shifts from science fiction to business plans. Mars colonies progress from fantasy to engineering challenges. For the first time in 50 years, humans plan to return to the moon, this time to stay. Whether space represents escape from Earth's problems or multiplication of them remains to be seen. The information revolution transforms into something deeper, consciousness revolution. Virtual reality creates alternate worlds indistinguishable from reality. Augmented reality overlays digital information on physical space. Brain-computer interfaces promise direct thought communication. The line between human and artificial intelligence blurs. We're not just changing what we know, but how we think, perceive, and exist. New challenges emerge faster than we can solve old ones. Cyber warfare threatens infrastructure without firing shots. Deepfakes make seeing no longer believing. Social media algorithms radicalize millions. Cryptocurrencies challenge state currency monopolies. Synthetic biology enables garage laboratories to edit life. Each innovation disrupts systems evolved over centuries. We're running civilization on beta software. debugging as we go. COVID-19 taught harsh lessons about global interconnection and fragility. A virus jumping from animals to humans in one city paralyzed the entire planet within months. Supply chains shattered, economies froze, social fabric tore. Yet it also demonstrated human adaptability. Scientists developed vaccines at warp speed. Communities organized mutual aid. Technology enabled continuity amid isolation. We learned we're more vulnerable and more resilient than we imagined. Looking forward, humanity faces converging crises requiring unprecedented cooperation. Climate change demands coordinated global action within this decade. Artificial intelligence needs governance before it governs us. Nuclear weapons still threaten omnicide. Biodiversity collapse undermines ecosystems supporting life. Resource depletion challenges infinite growth on a finite planet. Any one crisis could end civilization. Together, they require transformation on a scale matching the agricultural or industrial revolutions. Yet humans have always thrived on impossible challenges. We're the species that looked at the ocean and built boats, looked at the sky and built planes, looked at the moon and went there. We have survived ice ages, plagues, world wars, and nuclear standoffs. We've created art that moves souls, science that explains the universe, and love that transcends death. For all our flaws, and they are countless, we remain capable of extraordinary achievement. The next chapters of human history remain unwritten. Will we achieve sustainable civilization or collapse under our contradictions? Will we spread life throughout the cosmos or extinguish it on Earth? Will we transcend our biological limitations or destroy ourselves with our creations? These aren't distant questions, they're being answered by actions taken today, tomorrow, this decade. As you finish watching this journey through human history, remember, you're not a passive observer, but an active participant. Every choice you make, what you buy, how you vote, what you create, how you treat others shapes humanity's trajectory. History isn't something that happened to other people in the past. It's happening now, and you're making it. The story of human civilization is far from over. In fact, given the exponential rate of change, it may just be beginning. Whether the next chapters are humanity as finest or final hours depends on choices we make at this crossroads. The future isn't predetermined, it's being determined by 8 billion authors writing simultaneously, including you. 300,000 years ago, a small group of humans in Africa looked up at the stars and wondered. Today, their descendants, you and I, have walked on the moon, split the atom, decoded life itself, and connected billions of minds through invisible waves. We've created works of beauty that transcend time, committed horrors that shame our species, and built civilizations that remake the very planet we inhabit. This hasn't been a story of inevitable progress. It's been a chronicle of choices, millions upon millions of individual decisions that collectively shaped our world. Every innovation began with someone saying, "What if?" Every tragedy started with someone saying, "Why not?" Every triumph and every failure flows from the fundamental truth that we are a species capable of both breathtaking nobility and devastating cruelty, often simultaneously. As we stand at this pivotal moment in history, facing challenges that would have been incomprehensible to our ancestors, we carry within us their legacy, their courage, creativity, and stubborn refusal to accept limitations, the same spirit that drove humans to first control. Fire now drives us to harness the sun. The same curiosity that led us to agriculture now leads us to engineer life. The same cooperation that built the first cities now must save our planet. The story of human civilization isn't ending, it's transforming. Whether the transformation leads to transcendence or tragedy isn't written in the stars our ancestors watched. It's being written by us right now, in every laboratory and legislature, in every classroom and boardroom, in every choice we make about how to live together on this pale blue dot. You just witnessed humanity's entire story. Now go write the next chapter. Make it one worthy of the incredible journey that brought us here. Make it one future generations will thank you for.